Off limits, liberal, irreverent, oh, and really, really gay.
Welcome to Brain Purge. Thank you for joining me here tonight on Off Limits. I appreciate you hanging out with me tonight on the show. Tonight we're talking about controversial topics. We're just going to talk about 47 different controversial topics. We're going to touch on them. Obviously, we're not going to talk about them all in depth, but I'm going to talk about these topics, and I would love to hear you guys, your opinions on these matters. You can talk to me by tweeting at Off Limits Show on Twitter. You can also talk to me or communicate with me in the chat room on Spreaker.com right now, as well as on the Off Limits Show website, offlimitsshow.com. You can also listen to the show, of course, on iTunes. And excuse me, if you have a question or a comment you'd like to make, feel free to comment throughout the show through Twitter, as I said, at Off Limits Show, or on Spreaker in the chat room, or on the website in the chat room, and I'd be happy to respond to you and hear what you have to say. So, I've done several shows before in the past on controversial topics, usually off-limit shows. The shows are serious shows or go in very into deep, depth about them or whatever. Excuse me. And so, but this show though, since it's Brain Purge, I thought I would just kind of ramble on about what I think about each of these topics. And so we're going to discuss a lot of things from education to elections and presidents to healthcare, medicine, politics, religion, money, business, media, the entertainment industry, sex, gender, sports even, which I don't know a lot about, but a little bit, science, technology, and just the world at large. So I was thinking we might take them category by category. And by the way, hey, Ken Boggle, and hey to David, the 5x5. Thanks for listening to the show tonight. Two of my gay brethren in the chat there tonight. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your support. Just to pimp out their shows real quick, Ken Boggle does a show on Blog Talk Radio. And David does a show on Spreaker called the 5x5. And actually, they both do shows on Blog Talk Radio, and David actually has a show also on Spreaker. So you can check their shows out as well anytime you want. So I guess the first random category we'll start with will be I guess like healthcare and medicine, that kind of thing. And there's several topics in this I would like to discuss, and I'll just kind of list them off. I've written them down, so and talk about them individually. But there's abortion, there's euthanasia, medical marijuana, milk, just milk, Obamacare, healthcare laws, obesity in general, vegetarianism, vaccine for kids, right to healthcare, and prescription drugs. Okay, and so there's a lot of things to talk about in this category, but we're just going to talk about them, just kind of touch on them or whatever. And as I said, as I go through the show, if you have something you want to say, feel free to tweet me at Off Limits Show or to be in the chat room and let me know what your thoughts are. So I guess we'll start with abortion. And yeah, this is a very deep topic, and it's something that a lot of people don't want to talk about, but Abortion is, some people who are pro-abortion, generally, excuse me, I shouldn't say pro-abortion. No one's pro-abortion, but pro-choice, I should say, versus someone who is anti-abortion. Because let's face it, somebody who is pro-life, as they call themselves, it's not really about that. And it's not like the person who is pro-choice is anti-life. And so I hate that phrase or that word or that tagline, to say someone who is anti-abortion is pro-life, like the person who is not is against life or something. So I call them anti-abortionists. But for me, I think abortion is absolutely, positively the right of the woman that is carrying the child. Now, that's not to say that the father doesn't have rights and that the father shouldn't have rights as well. However, I think ultimately it's the mother's choice. I think that it should be a right. Now, is it killing a child to have an abortion? Yes. You're killing a child. You're killing it. You're killing a baby or a child. You're killing it. And I don't look at it in any other way. And I think a lot of people who are pro-choice don't look at it any other way either. And of course, there are different camps on when it's okay to have an abortion and when it's not. Whether it's early on in the first trimester or if it's past the third trimester, it's not okay. So and I agree. I think that there's a certain point where it's not really a thing that can necessarily feel pain, but even if it does feel pain, the question remains: is a woman supposed to, let's say, who's been raped or molested by her father and through incest or whatever, supposed to have that child and have to carry that for 9 months, live with that reminder, that painful reminder of the traumatic events that they had endured, and just so they can have a kid that isn't wanted by them in the first place, and that society will shun if they know who they are, and the mother probably won't want to keep because she's going to be reminded of her rapist or her father or whatever. Obviously, it creates a lot of issues. So when it comes to being pregnant for a woman, obviously there's a lot of issues to consider, and I think that that's why it's such a difficult decision. Now, can she just have the baby and give it up for adoption? Yes, absolutely. A woman can have a baby, give it up for adoption, never have to see it again. And anti-abortionists always say that that's what the mother should do. She should have the baby and give it up. Okay, fine. What about instances where the mother is going to be, her health is going to be in jeopardy? I think in those cases that absolutely the mother's life should be spared. In that case, you're just deciding between the mother's life and the child's life. And why is the child's life more valuable than the mother's? Because the mother's older? I mean, I don't really buy into that or believe that at all. So for me, it's really, I think it's really ridiculous that people have issues with women having the right. It's the decision of the woman, essentially. And in terms of looking at legally, a woman's right to choose, an abortion is a fundamental right. Okay. And that was dictated by the Supreme Court in 1973 in Roe versus Wade. Okay. So, excuse me. And the concept of personhood, which is what a lot of people who are anti-abortion say, that a person, that life begins at inception or whatever, and that's a person in there. Okay, no, it's not a fucking person. It's not a person when they can't speak, they can't communicate, they can't feel pain at a certain point, up to a certain point they can't do anything. It's not a life at that point, in my opinion. Just like an amoeba that could eventually become something, that's much more complex in terms of its organic abilities or whatever, meaning, ultimately could evolve into something else. Doesn't make that amoeba a human being just because ultimately it could evolve into one over time, over millennia. So it's no different than, that to me. And it also says that personhood it begins at birth, not at conception. And also fetuses, are not capable of feeling pain when an abortion is performed, they say. And so I don't think there's any way for us to really know that for sure, but they do say that we don't have at that point, up to the point where it's legal or whatever, the pain receptors or whatever to necessarily feel it. So anyway, those are some thoughts on abortion. Hey, Prankville, pro-choice. Kim Boggle is pro-choice, but I do think that the father should have some say unless it's rape or incest. 5x5 is also pro-choice. Okay. All right. Well, we're all pro-choice here. What do you think about it, Prankville? Todd doesn't ever really talk about anything serious, so I don't know if he's going to actually chime in on any of the things we're talking about tonight, but let's see what he says. Anyway, so yeah, I agree, and that's what I was saying, Ken. I think that a woman, I hate it when they say, okay, it's because the woman's having the baby, the father has absolutely no say. Well, of course the woman should choose, and it should be her decision ultimately what she does with it. But the father, if the father wants the child, I don't know. I think that he should be, if it's not like a rape or incest situation, he should be given some sort of merit as to whether she has it or not, as long as it's not going to cause her, pain or anything. So that's what I think anyway. So Ken Boggle apparently knocked up a girl. I didn't know that, Ken. That's interesting. I did not know that. That's an interesting thing. How did that happen, by the way? Curious, just curious how that happened. Feel free to expound on that. Anyway, so that's the first controversial topic, and so that's what my thoughts are on it. I'm essentially pro-choice, generally pro-choice, and I think that it should be remain legal. And the reason, one more point I want to make about it, that is that the reason it should remain legal is because people who are forced to have abortions or need to have abortions or whatever, for whatever reason, if they go through life and it's not legal to have an abortion, they're going to go back to the way things were before the 60s or before 1973, when women had to have them in back alleys and they couldn't go to see an actual doctor to do it. And a lot of women died as a result, or they did it themselves with a wire hanger or something. So, it makes more sense to me that they have the choice to have a clean abortion as opposed to one that might actually kill them. So that's what I think about that. All right. So Todd is pro-choice. Well, that's good. That's good to know. Ken Boggle says, back when I dated girls, I was too young, but I wish that she had kept the child because regardless, I would have done anything to have that child. Yeah. And that's the thing, though. That's where it gets down to the nitty gritty. And I think that's why I think a woman's choice really does trump a man's choice ultimately, because it is her body. She's the one that has to go through it, whatever. But it does take two to make the baby. And so to say that the father has absolutely no rights or no say, I think is unfair as well. But it's a good thing I'm gay and will never have to actually have to deal with a woman having an abortion or anything like that. So I don't have to worry about that. And unlike you, I've never dated girls because I'm a gold star gay. So anyway, that's what I think about that. So the next controversial topic in this category of healthcare and everything is euthanasia. And for those of you who don't know what euthanasia essentially is physician or doctor, assisted suicide. So there are people who eventually get to a point in their lives, if they're really old, or even if they're not old, if they're young and they have cancer or they have AIDS or some horrible disease that makes them go through a lot of pain and agony, that can't be controlled with medication, that we're simply it's just a pain to be alive every day. Then in those situations, I absolutely find it perfectly acceptable for euthanasia to be performed on someone if they request it. So if someone is dying in their deathbed and morphine isn't even helping them anymore, which there are cases where morphine doesn't help them at all, that pain's so desperately bad, believe it or not. And there are cases where people, even every day they wake up and they're in excruciating pain, depending on what they have, what ailment they have. So that being the case, in those situations, if I were in that situation and I were dying and I were in a deathbed, I would absolutely want somebody to put me out of my misery if I asked for it. I'd say, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to die. Please put me out of my misery. And the thing I always say is we do this to our pets. We have compassion. We have compassion for our animals when they're dying, when they're old and they no longer can get around or they're feeble and they can't be helped anymore by medicine or our vets or whatever. we put them to sleep. We put them to sleep. And most pets die by being put to sleep, not by just naturally dying and killing over one day. Because we as human beings are compassionate people, and we want our pets that we love